Academia is more than research output and publications. In this seminar series, we discuss the personal and social aspects of academic work that are not discussed enough. Welcome to Life in Academia.
A very, very warm welcome to our speaker, Lindy Elkins-Tanton today. Lindy is a professor in the School of Earth and Space Exploration, Arizona State University in the United States of America. Lindy is a scientist studying the formation and evolution of rocky planets. She is the principal investigator of the NASA Psyche mission, Arizona State University's vice president for the Interplanetary Initiative, and co-founder of Beagle Learning, a tech company that trains and measures problem solving and critical thinking. Also, fun fact, the asteroid 8252 is named for her, which I think is really exciting because I don't think I know anybody who has an asteroid named after them. So that's cool. Apart from being an excellent researcher and scientist, Lindy also works on the creation of effective interdisciplinary teams for maximizing discovery and student-centered learning and the reformation of education for the information age. That is kind of the reason why she's here. She, in her thought-provoking essay published last summer in Issues in Science and Technology, I posted the link in the chat, so please feel free to click it, have a read through it, because it was one of the most influential things that I've read in a long time, and it kind of triggered life in academia, to be honest. So I am ridiculously excited to have Lindy on here today. And Lindy urges in this piece, Lindy urges fellow scientists to ask ourselves whether we are solving the biggest and most urgent problems, and whether we're lifting up our colleagues and the next generation to do the same. Given the challenges of climate change, of all these other issues that we're facing across the globe, we do need to change our approach, and we need to do it right now. The challenges are too complex, too impactful, and too urgent to continue as we are. I am truly unbelievably excited to have Lindy chat here today about her thoughts on the hero model and how we can and may have to shift academia in order for it to be the place we all want to be in. I cannot wait to have the chat later on with all of you as well. So please join me in welcoming Lindy Elkins-Tanton.
Thank you so much. Guten Tag. Ich spreche nur ein bisschen Deutsch. So thank you for allowing me to speak in English. And I'm really excited to talk about this topic. I think it's incredibly important, and it's taken over a lot of my passion, even more than the fundamental science that I'm doing, because I think it's so important for humanity, frankly. So I'm thrilled that you have this group and that I can talk with you today. I want to start out by telling you a little bit about my own academic story, because it will put this into context, what my article is about, and some discussion we'll have at the end. And so indeed, the name of the essay, which you so kindly cite, is it time to say goodbye to our heroes? And the photo I'm showing you here is of the big NASA Psyche spacecraft up behind us with the huge silver high gain antenna, and a little part of the team putting it together with me on the right. And so that's a little bit of a way to skip ahead in the story and say that working in teams on this spacecraft did clarify a lot of my thoughts about academia. So I think that for many of us, when we start out to be research scientists or to work otherwise as a researcher in academia, we think there's a kind of a straight ahead path, even though we're not really sure where it leads to. You're meant to get your first degree and your second degree and move on until you're qualified to have an academic position, and then something happens and maybe it becomes permanent, but it's sort of off in the bushes. It's hard to know where. And so we're trying to meet these jumps really at every stage. How do we get to the next one? And in retrospect, my career path does not look straight. It looks a little bit more like this. And even at the time, I was really not confident that what I wanted to do was move upward in academia. I started out as an undergraduate at MIT. When I got there, I was a little bit young, just had turned was not yet turned 18. And I did an undergraduate degree and a master's degree. And then I went and worked in business. I wasn't ready to get my doctorate yet. I was very curious about how the rest of the world functioned. And I worked as a management consultant, and I wrote business plans to help young high technology companies get going. I worked in the magazine industry. I got married. I had my son, and then I got divorced. And when I was 30, I decided I wanted to go back to academia. I'd been teaching mathematics as a lecturer at an undergraduate college for a couple of years. And I really loved the freedom of academia, the ability that it gave me to keep asking bigger and harder questions and to have the freedom of what my days were. And I decided that was the path that I most wanted. But I'd been out of academia for a decade. And as you all know, that's not usually the way it's considered one would have a successful career as a scientist, to return to graduate school at the age of 31, 10 years too late. At that time, I was a single mother, and my son started kindergarten the same week that I started graduate school. And so this was, when was this? 1997. So not tremendously long time ago. And I was the only woman in my department at MIT. I went back to MIT for grad school who had a child. A lot of the male students were married and had children, but I was the only woman who did. And I was really excited to be there, to be accepted back into that very high quality program. But I wasn't expecting to end up where I did. So I think it's an important note to say, perhaps we don't always aim down that straight path, but we can still end up somewhere really, really good and thought-provoking along the way. So this is me just after starting grad school, collecting rock samples up in the Sierra Nevada. It was an interesting time in my life. And very soon after graduate school, I went and did a postdoctoral position at Brown University and started working on the Siberian flood basalts. And this is where, again, I need to tell two sides. I feel like I could tell this story two different ways. I could say, look, I got all my degrees from MIT, and then I postdoced at Brown University. It's a very well-regarded university. You know, obviously I'm on the path to success. But while I was at Brown, I had a lot of trouble getting an academic position. I kept being shortlisted and being invited in to give job talks and then not getting the position. And so I would also mention at this moment that, of course, my academic experience is very much centered in America. I spent a week at a time at university in München and at Oxford and in Switzerland and some other universities in Europe. And I have at least a little bit of authentic experience with many, many non-American friends. But of course, many of the things that I'll say will be a little bit specific to American academia, but I think not the culture. I think the culture part is something that we all recognize. So finally, I did get an academic job. And it was back at MIT, which I felt like was the validation of everything I tried to do. Then first I was unemployable, and then I got a job at a place that I just really greatly esteem. And my first year that I was there, I won a big grant from the National Science Foundation to work on whether the end Permian extinction, the biggest extinction in Earth history, was caused by this huge volcanic event in central Siberia, or was it not caused by it? Something I couldn't believe we didn't know. One of the biggest volcanic events in all of Earth history, the biggest eruption, the biggest extinction that ever occurred, were they related? And I ended up leading a team of 30 scientists from 8 different countries, and we did 5 field seasons in central Siberia. So there I am with my colleague Volodya Pavlov, who's holding the Explorers Club flag out in central Siberia. And it was in this project that I really started thinking about the nature of research and how to make an important result. It's so easy for us to just take the step that's right in front of us and write the peer-reviewed paper that is that next step. And that is absolutely what one should do for graduate school, for the PhD. But then how quickly is it possible for us to turn to answering bigger and more important questions? And today, in today's world, I think it takes a team of people with many disciplines to effectively answer the biggest and most important questions in front of us. Not exclusively, there's still lots of room for the individual researcher, but some of these projects really do take multiple disciplines. So the question became for me, how do you cause a whole team to work together toward the greater good? Instead of trying to take their slice of the pie, their bit of money, and run back to their lab and do what they would have done on their own anyway, which is the tendency in academia. Go back and take that money and use it for your natural next step anyway, not necessarily the one that this project needs most. I had people in academia ask me, what was it like to work in business? That must have been awful. Isn't everyone such a cutthroat? And they're just all competing so hard. And my experience, if I were to compare, like very competitive business, which I was in, to very competitive academia, it's hard to know who would win on the competition scale. But business has the advantage that everyone is fighting for the same bottom line. They need to make the money so their company succeeds. In academia, it's really often each person out for themselves. And that's where I feel like the culture often fails. So this project in Siberia really made me think about that, because I had to try to get everyone, I had to think of ways to try to get everyone to work together and pull toward a common answer. And I would say I was maybe 75% successful in that. I learned a lot. And then came some years later, the Psyche mission. When I'd been at MIT on the faculty for 5 years, and I received an invitation to apply for the directorship at the Carnegie Institution for Science in Washington, DC. And I decided to go for it. And I talked to my department chair, who at the time was Maria Zuber, and she said, sure, you won't get it, you're too junior, but it's a good experience and everyone will learn your name. But then I got it. And then I had to decide, am I going to take it? And I thought, I really care about how teams work together. I really want to help people succeed beyond what they could do without support. And so I'm going to take this leadership position and kind of jump out of the MIT ship and try something different. And while I was at Carnegie, I got an email from a couple of scientists at Jet Propulsion Laboratory saying, would you like to propose a mission to NASA, a space mission that would test your ideas that you just published in your paper? I published a paper in 2011 with Ben Weiss and Maria Zuber about planetesimals, these earliest little bodies in the solar system that formed the size of cities or continents and often differentiated into a metallic core and rocky exterior. And they became the material that collided and accreted into the rocky planets. So I was writing about those very first bodies, the shrapnel of which is now in the asteroid belt. And these JPL scientists said, do you want to propose a mission? It never occurred to me to do that, but it was a very fun idea to try to do. So that's me on the left, and on the right, Brian Bone, who's our assembly, test, and launch operations manager under our spacecraft being held up on with a dolly, as it's called, and he's pointing with his flashlight at the communications panel that had just been installed. So that's the end of the story, really, in a way, or midway down the story, because we went through 3 years of intensive competition. You have to write first a 250-page proposal, and then you have to put together a team of about 150 people and write a 1,000-page proposal. In the first proposal stage, we competed against 28 missions, and in the second proposal stage, we competed against 5. And in 2017, we were selected for flight, which was amazing. And just before that, 2 major things that happened in my life. One was I decided I wanted to move back into a regular academic institution for a variety of reasons that can be discussed later on if anyone's interested. And I decided to do something, again, along the same lines. If I'm going to work as hard as I am, which is a lot of hard work in academia, as you all know, I really want it to matter. I want it to matter more than just for the top 0.5% of excellent students who will be fine without me. I want it to matter more than just the 20 precious researchers who I was the director for, who never had to do anything but their research, and great life there, boy, to be a scientist at Carnegie Institution, no classes, no students, total freedom to research 100% of the time. But I thought, if I'm going to work that hard, I want it to have a bigger impact. So I tried a big public university instead of a tiny private one. And I moved to Arizona State University, where we have on campus 60,000 students. And you could imagine it's 5 sigma in every direction on every axis. And it's a real, I don't know, it's a real adventure. and a pleasure. And I find that often the people are much kinder, which is a lovely thing. But the science is still really excellent. It's a unique and really unusual university. So that's where I am now. And Psyche Mission is now nearing launch, which is amazing. We're supposed to launch later this year. We've had as many as 800 people on this team, dozens of different organizations. Right now we have about 500 people on the team. So lots and lots of experience with how you help people do better and what it means when they all have a common vision. So that's my background. This is me last week at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. There's the spacecraft now at Kennedy Space Center getting ready to be integrated onto the rocket. And later this year, if all goes well, please keep your fingers crossed. We still have some technology challenges to overcome. But later this year, we should be launching on a SpaceX Falcon Heavy. And off this spacecraft will go to the asteroid belt, where in 3 years, it will encounter the asteroid Psyche, which we believe is made mostly of metal. And that will be the first time humans have ever visited a metal-rich surface. So that's what we're trying to do. And that's my background with teams and what people can do with their lives. And so in the end, I've decided it really is all about the teams. And I would see, for example, on the Psyche mission, we really worked hard to give it its own culture, where the junior people at the meeting were invited to sit at the table instead of against the wall, chairs against the wall where junior people are often relegated, where everyone's voice is heard. You know, so often you can picture this so clearly when building a spacecraft. It's equally true, but less apparent in regular academic research, that it's the person who is actually manipulating the data or soldering the wires, often the junior person who actually knows what the problem is or what is working or what is not working. But they are often not invited to speak. They're often not invited to have their important opinion heard. And yet without it, of course, the scientific research won't go as well. But on the spacecraft, the possible results are even more dire. You know, this spacecraft could fail in space and lose, waste almost $1 billion, the cost of this process, if we don't listen to the junior person who understands what the problem really is. And so the idea that people should, as much as they can, leave implicit bias behind, including the implicit bias about job title, and instead judge people on their merits and invite them to bring what they have to offer. And that's made so much more successful a team than we would have had otherwise. I think it's carried us through COVID to the extent that it has. It's very hard to build a spacecraft during COVID. So these are some of the ideas that have come to me really as very important while working on Psyche Mission. And so, so then came that essay that I wrote last year. This is the spacecraft in the clean room still at Jet Propulsion Laboratory with one of its solar panel wings extended as it will be in space, one on each side, 20 kilowatt solar panels. And again, thinking about the team, is it time to say goodbye to our heroes and think about ways that we can be more effective in our teams, more inclusive, more diverse, and therefore more successful moving into our human future? So I came to think about academia as something that's in the hero model. And this was really something that was developed in the 19th century and earlier, and very largely at German universities, where there's the Herr Doctor professor who is the owner of his or now her field. And it's very similar in the United States. It's a different terminology, but the same idea that there's only one expert in a given field at a university, and they stand on their pyramid of resources. They have money from grants, they have graduate students who work with them, and undergraduates, maybe they have lecturers or even other professors who are considered a part of their group over which they control what happens. And they are also the owner of their topic area. And so new information tends to be added in slivers around the base of their mountain, really in their field, like taking little steps forward in their research, in their real estate of knowledge. Now, on the one hand, you can say quite rightly that science can only take small steps forward. And I believe this is true in most every field of academic discourse. Perhaps in the humanities, larger steps can be taken by individuals, especially when a step is often a full book instead of just a paper. But I think the concept pertains, you can translate it between your fields, that one's knowledge extends only within one's knowledge area usually. And then when it bumps up against the mountain of the next hero professor over, then a fight ensues. Because very often in academic departments, people are not invited to or not welcome to publish in the fields of others. They're considered to be a usurper. They're taking over where there really is an expert already. And so something that has been recognized for centuries that I write about in this essay is that something that comes naturally with this model is fame and charisma, because often people actually attain these heights of ownership of resources through their personal charisma and indeed their fame. And it's the famous people who get to speak more, they get to invited to more things, their proposals are selected more often. This is why double-blind proposal judgment is so important. They've just been doing this in astronomy and astrophysics at the National Science Foundation, taking in proposals and actually making it unidentifiable whose proposal it is. And they've found huge increases in the number of proposals that were funded for junior people, for people who had never been funded before, and for women, because we cannot successfully get rid of our implicit bias. And so if a person comes with a name that you recognize or from an institution that's more famous, they're much more likely to accrue more of this wealth in their pyramid. And of course, with that, not necessarily evil unto itself, but with that comes the opportunity for misuse. It becomes the opportunity for people who live within this pyramid under this singular person to be harassed or bullied or silenced, or for that hero who owns that pyramid to decide which jobs they get in the future or don't get, because so much depends upon the letters from the advisor. So there's a huge opportunity for misuse. Now, it doesn't always happen, but it does sometimes happen. And the question I'm always asking myself is, what is the benefit to society of someone's success being based on their fame and their charisma? And I'm sure that all of you have recognized, the way I have over the years, that we are taught to speak in a certain way that conveys our confidence of our correctness. And people will stand up and they will silence the room simply with their tone of voice. And it's a way that we learn to speak. And I know I use it myself. And so my question to everyone is this the best and fastest way to a better human future? Even Jonas Salk said, the object is not to put down the other, but to raise up the other. And that's often a bit of a radical idea in academia. I was taught at ASU that my personal emotions were irrelevant and in fact got in the way of the presentation, and that if I needed to talk about kindness among our colleagues or how people treated each other, the culture of the team, then that just meant I wasn't strong enough or brave enough to really deserve a place in the paradigm. And so I asked myself then, what is a hero? Usually a person admired for their courage or achievements, but perhaps we could add their courage or achievements in service of the greater good. Because so often in academia, our service is in service of ourselves, of our own reputation. You know, we want our graduate students to get academic jobs at the best academic institutions because that makes our CV look better. Whereas in service of humanity, perhaps if each person highly trained with a PhD became a mayor or ran a company or was in the national legislature, they might even do more for humanity than taking an academic position. So thinking about what is in service of the greater good. And so I ask, how can we construct project teams that are not based on the hero model? How do we solve the biggest problems in the most efficient way? We've been experimenting with this way of putting together teams. And before I walk you through this graphic, I will just say that we've been using this technique at the Interplanetary Initiative at Arizona State University for 5 years now, experimenting with it. And we have given seed funding to something like 25 or 30 teams created in this process. And then we ask them to go out, thrive, look for outside funding, get follow-on funding from federal grants or philanthropy. And so far they've brought in 8 times our original funding. So in total, we funded our teams with $1 million and they've brought $8 million into the university. So it's pretty successful. So we start by, as a group, brainstorming the biggest questions we can think of that need to be solved in a given field. This is something that we all could do together today, for example. What are the biggest questions we need to solve that we can do with our academic brains and our critical thinking that needs to be done for humanity in whatever area we want to consider? And then we vote on the most important ones. I like having a very diverse group in this brainstorming. Undergraduate students, people from the community, people from companies, people from all over the university, not just faculty and deans get to speak. Then after we vote on the most important questions, we volunteer into teams right there on the spot. Which of these questions most interest you? Go join that team. And in the next hour, decide on what one-year milestones you could reach in service of this big question. These questions tend to be so big that they're the question of a career or several careers. But what could we do this year, work that would lead directly towards solving this very important question? After all of that is done, then we choose a leader, not till then. So these are teams created around questions, not created around leaders. And then we put them under professional project management so they hit their milestones and use their budgets. It's been very successful. People have really enjoyed it. The teams have persisted. So this is one way that I'm chipping away at this. And then I would also ask, why does positive team culture matter? I imagine that many of you, like I, have experienced a negative team culture in academia. It's not always true. There are wonderful places where people are supportive and kind in addition to successful and excellent researchers. But there are many places like I've experienced where the goal is to be tougher than the next person, not necessarily to help them. And I'll tell you why it matters. I'm going to tell you first why I suddenly decided that I could stand up and really talk about this instead of feel a little embarrassed about it like I would when I was, for example, a graduate student. And that is because NASA told us that one of the reasons they selected the Psyche mission was because we obviously had a good team culture where everyone could speak up and do their job most effectively. And they absolutely link a positive team culture with success on missions. And so I can say to you all that positive team culture is worth $1 billion. It's not just for the week or something that we do out of charity. That kind of thing can carry the day. So first of all, better decisions. Cool heads, calm heads think better. You'll get more ideas. So that's something that has been shown in the social science literature. Then project risk is reduced for this reason that we discussed earlier. The best news, as we say on Psyche mission, is bad news brought early. If everyone can speak up, then you can hear the problems early enough when you can still fix them. And then also attraction and retention of talent, because rudeness and bullying and harassment reduce diversity. Social science says that until there's close to 30% of people who are like however you identify yourself in a group, you feel alone until there's 30% of you. And so if you feel alone in a group and there's rudeness and bullying and harassment, it's very likely that you'll say to yourself, I will have better chance of success somewhere else. So it does not matter how good your hiring rubric is that brings in diversity. If you have a bad culture, you'll never retain it. So a few suggestion norms for teams. I think it's actually really great for teams to actually discuss what their norms of behavior will be. Set your culture explicitly. So one that I always use is every voice is heard. In the classroom, I set up a structure of learning that every student has unique information to bring and share every single class period. And I do this very purposefully and with the structure in the hopes that people begin to believe in their subconscious that it's the norm for every person to speak in every meeting and that they will take that forward into the rest of their lives. Believe that everyone comes with best intentions. Sometimes we're wrong, that's okay, we can afford those failures. But if you believe everyone comes with best intentions, it stops that instinct to write an angry email or respond with a cutting comment and just keeps the tone so that indeed we can make forward progress. Bring problems and challenges to the whole team and invite people to solve them with you instead of solving them on their own. These things are things I did once I reached leadership in academia, and I reached, in addition to the Psyche team, I was for 5 years, I was a director at Arizona State University also before I had to stop directing the school because I couldn't do the school and the mission. And I'm sure that all of you have someone you can think of in your own faculty group, your own academic group, who immediately writes the angry email in response to almost anything. There's someone who right away writes back something that just makes you want to like not look at your computer for a minute. So my process was, as soon as someone had an angry response, I would set up an hour-long meeting in their office, and I would come talk to them about how we could solve this problem together. And so that had some astonishing outcomes, much more successful than I'd ever guessed. First of all, sometimes we found solutions, which was great. Second of all, people felt like they were seen and respected and heard. And that's one of the biggest problems in academia. People don't feel seen, heard, and respected because it's a game of fame and it's a game of winning. And so when you don't feel heard and seen and respected, you have this wellspring of rage. And that's what comes out in these emails. So then these people were heard and seen and respected. And then finally, the ones who reflexively complained realized they actually didn't want to help solve it. And they stopped writing emails because they knew they'd have to sit with me for an hour if they did. So that worked really quite surprisingly well. And then treat everything as experiment. Failures are okay. That's a very important thing to realize everywhere we go. So then this is a tiny exercise I'm just going to go through quickly, but I think it's really interesting. I've done it with groups of postdoctoral students with really a lot of fun. And I wonder if you've asked yourselves, what are my values? Sometimes they might be things like honesty or self-reliance or kindness. In academia, often the values are expertise or competitiveness, the ability to compete. But thinking about what your values are and then creating your life around those values, frankly, living them in the workplace, living them in your group can be a very, very powerful thing for setting culture. And then think about how you define success. Very often in the world today, it's money or happiness. Sometimes people say power, but really that's just money. So in a lot of cases, but there are a lot of other things we could define as success: justice or equity or inclusiveness are some examples. And so these two questions I think are really great ones to just ponder. And then finally, something that's important when we choose our leaders in academia as in anywhere else, leaders have to take pleasure in the successes of others or they cannot successfully lead. And in academia, all too often, leaders are really there to accrue additional fame for themselves, frankly, to continue to shine up their own CV. And they are not going to be successful at really helping everyone in their group unless they take pleasure in other people's successes. All right. One last thing just to think about. On the left, some aspirations. What is our preferred future? And on the right, what culture do we need to achieve that future? Something to think about. What are my personal aspirations? And how will I know that I'm making my intended impact? And then a question I love to ask people, what is my biggest goal to have accomplished in 30 years? So often we're asked, what do you want to do in 3 years or 5 years? Where do you want to be in 5 years? And those are great. These are all great questions for us. Little introspection is a very positive thing. But if you're only thinking in 3 and 5 years, you're probably thinking in steps that are too small. And in order to make a really gigantic impact, a really giant contribution to humankind, as I know that all of us can, you have to think bigger because you will never make the steps from where you are that are big enough to get to that place. And so this is something that a leadership coach had me do. What is my biggest goal to have accomplished in 30 years? And who can I think of right now who is doing something like that goal? Someone whose career I could emulate a little bit and use it as an inspiration to get to that place. I ask these questions, and I know sometimes people think, well, this is trite or it's extra, I need to get back to doing my real work. But I think as a species, humanity doesn't have a lot of time to waste on small steps or small aspirations or small outcomes. And so I think everyone with a good brain, like everyone on this call, needs to be thinking about what are the biggest and most important things that I could do in my life? And how do I start right now? I have to mention that I have written a memoir called A Portrait of the Scientist as a Young Woman. And it's being released by the publishers in 1 week on June 7th. And so it's like it required that I would mention this. I talk a lot about these same stories I've just told you in case they're interesting. And on the left also, Psyche Mission is very active on social media, and we've got a great website with a lot of resources if you're interested. And so finally, my thoughts that I'd like to share in the end, my own conclusions are that there are two things that I I use to guide myself when I think that I'm straying. One is to be more bold, and the other one is to be more kind. Kindness is often thought of as a weakness in academia, but I would say that instead it's a sign of strength. And so with that, I thank you so much for the time today to come and talk with you.